I'm an organizational psychologist by training. That means I'm the nerdy one that studies, I study why work sucks and how to get it to suck a lot less. And when I look at that, I ask a lot of questions around teams because teams are so essential to our work, right? Fundamentally, work is teamwork these days. All of the easy problems of work have been solved. Anything that could be solved by an individual probably has been solved, made routine, and if ChatGPT can't do it by now, give it an update or two, and it'll be able to do it. So what we have left is work that requires collaboration, requires multiple different minds, diverse perspectives, all coming together to find the best ideas and the best solutions. And so you start to ask, okay, what is it about those teams that actually allows them to tap into innovation, into problem solving, into resiliency? What is it about those teams that drives a sense of high performance at all times that actually makes them able to look at failures, learn from them, and get better? And when I ask most people this question, they give me the same word. You probably already know what it is because, it's the title of the presentation. They say trust. And that's true. That's accurate. That is exactly what it is. One of the number one factors that explains high-performing teams is what most people would call trust. But that's actually where common sense and common practice deviate. Because when you start to ask people about trust, you find out that we have an awful lot of misconceptions about how trust is supposed to work on teams. I think one of the biggest is we have this misconception, quite frankly, that we can build trust in between teams. I mean, we've all been to a team building or a trust building activity, right? If not, we're all going to do trust falls. You at home, you're going to be doing trust falls by yourself. Wait a minute, no, that's not going to work. We've all done one of those team building activities that's supposed to build trust, right? Maybe we've done the trust fall, maybe we've done the personality test, maybe we've gone on the ropes course together. My favorite is the let's use the planks to cross the imaginary river together. I once fell into said imaginary river and drowned. I don't know how, it was just carpet in a hotel ballroom, but somehow I died. So I'm not the biggest fan of those one-time trust-building activities. In fact, I'm not even a big fan of the phrase building trust. Because, quite frankly, if you ask, how do I build trust with my team, that puts the onus on you. But trust isn't something you can force on people. Their trust is your privilege, right? It's something that you potentially earn over time, but even that isn't necessarily at the heart of what happens in team dynamics. The truth about trust is that trust isn't given and trust isn't earned. Trust is reciprocated. Trust isn't given, trust isn't earned, trust is reciprocated. There is a cycle, a loop that goes on in every interaction you have with your coworkers, with your team, with your family, with your friends. There is a cycle going that determines whether or not you grow in trust with that person as the loop closes or whether or not you diminish in trust with that person. How do I know this? Well, I'm alive. I live life. I interact with people. You've had it happen too. Think about it, right? When we think about the type of trust we're talking about, we want people in a work context to trust each other enough to share what they're really thinking, to share their crazy ideas, to speak up when they disagree, to point out something that they might find objectionable or unethical, to share the benefit of their sort of whole selves, to talk about their failures, their setbacks, and what they learned from them, to ask for help. All of those things require trust. And yet, we've all been in that scenario where we've decided we have enough trust with the team or with our boss or with our coworker to actually share that crazy idea we have, and then are immediately told, nah, that won't work. We don't have the budget for that, right? We don't have the timeline for that. We don't have enough people for that. We've all been in that scenario where we finally worked up the trust to share our idea that we're excited about, and it was shot down immediately. We've all been there. What happened to your level of trust in that person in the group right afterwards? Did it increase? Surely not. It decreases. That's the cycle. When you look at how trust is formed in teams, it's not given, it's not earned, it's reciprocated. It's what I call the trust loop, right? It works like this. As you build trust through a team, and you build trust in a variety of different ways that we're going to talk about, the goal is to build trust enough to get people to take a leap, to get them to take an interpersonal risk, to share their crazy idea, to speak up, to talk about a failure. They take that leap, and then in the moment they're taking that leap, they're looking to you to match their leap with your sense of respect for them and for their idea. This doesn't mean you have to agree with their idea, but it does mean you have to hear it, right? And that's what you're looking for when you took that leap. You may have shared that crazy idea, and there may not have been the budget to pull it off. But you didn't want to be told that in the moment. You wanted to have your idea heard, felt out. If you do that, then the loop closes and you actually grow in trust. This trust loop can be a virtuous cycle that builds trust, and what we, in psychology, we like to change every word into a different word in psychology to make ourselves sound smart. It's the same thing in medicine, right? Like, it's not your leg, it's your tibia and it's also, we just make up all sorts of stuff, right? I grew up singing that it was the leg bone connected to the knee bone, but hey, we like to complicate things, right? So we use this term psychological safety. The feeling that it is safe enough in a team to take interpersonal risks, to take this leap of faith. And that's what we're ultimately looking for when we build trust, is we're looking for a level of psychological safety on the team where people are willing to share their brightest ideas and have them heard. And so what I want to do today is I want to go through this leap with you, this trust leap, respect loop. I want to take you through this loop and show you, how do we build trust on a team? What does that look like? What does the research say? Right? And also, how do we demonstrate respect to the people that have trusted us enough to take that leap? How do we make sure that they don't fall? Yeah, I wasn't lying when I said we'd be doing trust falls, just a little bit differently. We're going to do them conceptually. That way nobody gets hurt. Right? But what is it that we can actually, how can we be that person they can take the leap and fall back on? We're going to go through all of that. And in doing so, we're going to outline this framework of how we, whether we're in a leadership role, where we're just talking about our teammates, or to be honest with you, our personal lives with our family and friends, we're going to learn how we can grow and keep this trust loop going into a virtuous cycle. And we're going to learn how to avoid turning it into a vicious cycle. Because trust, this loop has to cycle multiple different times in order to grow trust. But one leap that's not met with respect can bring the whole thing down. So we're going to go through all of that and learn, how do we build that sense of trust on our teams to drive our performance, to drive our innovation. Does that sound like a plan? Is it a good plan for our time together today? Yeah. Good. All right. The rest of you, trust me. It's going to be great. So let's talk about this trust to leap thing first, right? When we talk about trust, we talk about that feeling of our ability to trust someone else. We're actually not talking about a feeling. We're not talking about an emotion. Scientifically, we're actually talking about a chemical. Trust is a chemical. Specifically, it's a hormone. It's the hormone oxytocin that goes through your bloodstream and into your brain. Oxytocin. You might have heard of oxytocin too. It's sometimes called the love hormone, right? Because we feel oxytocin when we're around the people we love, when we hug, when we have physical touch. When babies are born, there's a stimulation of oxytocin, right? In fact, a lot of times to induce labor, we give them pitocin, which is synthetic oxytocin. Your body needs this oxytocin, right? This feeling of bonding and connection. And when we have a particularly vulnerable moment or a moment where we trust each other, you actually can see people's level of oxytocin increase in their bloodstream and in their brain. And in fact, and I'm still kind of unclear on the ethics of this, we've actually done experiments where I say we, that I don't want you to think like I'm doing experiments that I think are unethical. But But there's actually been experiments where we stimulate people's oxytocin by giving them an oxytocin nasal spray, right? Like Flonase, but full of oxytocin, and then ask them to engage in different experiments that require them to trust other people. And you can see a direct correlation between the level of oxytocin in someone's brain and their willingness to trust. But here's where it gets really interesting. When you're on the receiving end of someone else's trust, your level of oxytocin increases. When someone tells you something like, hey, I haven't shared this with a lot of people, but I just wanted to tell you, right? Or when someone says, hey, could you help me with something? I'm really struggling. When they're taking that leap, the level of oxytocin in your brain increases, and you're actually more likely to exhibit trustworthy behavior as a result, right? So trust is literally reciprocated. The chemical that causes humans to trust each other, oxytocin, is literally reciprocated between two people. And when this happens, a lot of great things happen, especially on a team. You see these increases in people willing to share their bright ideas, willing to share their setbacks, willing to talk about their failures, and as a result, learn and grow from them as you do that. And ultimately, I think the increase of this chemical oxytocin in the brain that builds up is actually what allows some teams and some individuals to tap into what we sometimes call a growth mindset, the idea that failure isn't final, it's just feedback. And the ability for teams to learn collaboratively together happens when we increase the sense of oxytocin. How do I know that? Well, we've studied it. Not just in the lab giving people oxytocin Flonase, we've studied it by looking at actual different work teams. One of my favorite examples of this happened 3 decades ago, and it was a study conducted by this woman. This is Amy Edmondson. She's a brilliant researcher at Harvard Business School. And about 30 years ago, she was doing research on 2 different Boston area hospitals and looking at the nurses in those different hospitals, looking at the different wards as a team. So in every hospital, right, you have all of these different wards that people work on. So you have labor and delivery ward, you have intensive care ward, you have, I guess there's a less intensive care ward. I don't know what you would name that because it just sounds like a bummer, right? Like, it's actually good news when you move from intensive care to a regular one, but it just seems like, why would I be getting less intensive care? I want to be always getting the most intensive care, right? But you have all of these different wards inside the hospital, and each ward has a group of nurses working on any given shift, and in every given shift, there's a charge nurse, the nurse in charge of the nurses on that ward. And so what Amy wanted to see was, how do we explain the dynamic between the team and the performance of these different wards? And so she's giving all sorts of different assessments, leadership assessments, team culture assessments, and then looking at all of the different data that you use to judge performance. So everything from patient satisfaction scores, readmittance rates, right? Because if somebody gets discharged and then they're back within 3 days, we probably didn't actually help heal them because they had to come back, right? Medical error rates, overall procedure success, all of those different things. Looking at every single correlation of how you would judge these different nurses and trying to figure out what predicts great performance on these teams. And the most interesting thing she found, it's a little counterintuitive, follow me for a moment. The most interesting thing she found wasn't that better teams with better culture and more trust resulted in higher patient satisfaction scores, et cetera. That's what you would expect. What she found was that some of the highest performing teams with some of the highest rated leaders had a higher than average rate of reported accidents. That's a little weird, right? The teams that actually get along the best with the leaders that are judged as the best make more mistakes, have more procedural errors, give the wrong prescription more often. That's really, we got to figure out what's going on there, right? Because a trusting team shouldn't lead to malpractice, but for some reason on paper it looks like it is. Some of you I see whispering to each other because you've already figured this out. Yes, I'm looking at you. Also because you're in the front row and that's the only row I can see. There's that. It turns out when Amy and her team started sitting in on the individual meetings, what she found is that when I say that the most trusting teams with the best leaders had a higher than average rate of reported accidents, that word reported is doing an awful lot of work in the sentence. So it turns out that when you looked authentically throughout all of the different teams, they were all having roughly the same error rates. The difference was on the high trust teams, they were actually talking about it in their meetings. They were actually saying, here's what I did, here's how I fixed it, and having a conversation about how we can make sure it doesn't happen again in the future. And the teams that were low on trust, with low-rated leaders, those teams were, well, they were hiding it. They were thinking, okay, maybe I screwed up and I fixed it, but I don't need to tell anybody, which is unethical, often illegal, but I think one of the most damaging things about it, if you can be more damaging than unethical and illegal, is that you're depriving the team of learning from your failure. Right? Because in having the conversation, those high-trust teams were learning what to avoid doing so that they didn't make the mistake either. And this is one of those things, if I could just get deeply personal for a moment. So, you know those things your parents told you when you were a kid that you just like rolled your eyes at and you were like, this is ridiculous. What a dumb, we called them, in our house we called them dadisms. There'd be these dadisms, right? Well, then I became a dad and started to realize some of these dadisms were true, right? And one of the ones my dad always used to say is that failure is a great teacher and tuition's half off if it's someone else's failure, right? That's great. I want a scholarship to failure. That part sounds a little weird. But follow me, that's what's happening in these high-trust teams. Everyone's getting the benefit of learning from one person's failure, so we're collectively tapping into that growth mindset. In addition, when people are talking about those mistakes early, you have a team that can fix them sooner too. Have you ever worked on a team where somebody finally gets around to telling you a screw up that they've had, and as you unpack the details, you think, oh man, this would have been so much easier to fix a month ago, 2 months ago, etc. So this is how trust really drives that performance in that first one. As you work to build that trust that encourages people to take the leap, they share with you what they're really thinking for sure, but they also share with you what they're struggling with, what they're working with, and how you can work through that and learn from it and grow from it, which is why I think it's so important to kind of take this first step of building out that sense of trust on the team. So how do you do that? How do you actually spike that hormone oxytocin? How do you get people to feel connected to each other, et cetera? Well, a couple different ways I want to give you today. The first, believe it or not, is quite counterintuitive, and it's to find free time. Just to find free time on your team, interacting with your team. It turns out that unstructured time on a team is actually some of the most productive time that team can share. Think about the last time you had kind of nothing to do with people on your team. Some of you, it might have been in this conference. You're here with your coworkers or other members of your team. You're hanging out during the break. You're enjoying an espresso or that incredible bacon that they had at the buffet. And you're talking, and you're not talking about work, right? You're talking about how was your weekend? You're talking about what are you looking forward to? You're talking about your hobbies. You're talking about your family. You're talking about what makes you you. And from a psychological standpoint, I can tell you that we study these interactions, and we find that when people have this unstructured time, they find what are called uncommon commonalities. Uncommon commonalities. Commonalities that are commonalities between two people, things 2 or 3 people on the team have in common that are uncommon to the rest of the team or the context inside of the team, right? So these are things like hobbies, these are things like backgrounds, where did you grow up, tell me about your family, what are you into, what are you looking forward to, etc. These are things that they can be as big as deep lived experiences and as small as who's your favorite superhero, which is Batman, just in case you were wondering. Oh, some of you are giving me a weird look at that. Okay, fine. Iron Man. Yeah? Okay. I have bad news for you. They're the same character. They are. Just a privileged white dude who fights crime in high-tech gear and has parental issues. It's the same character. It's probably why I resonate with him, to be honest with you, if I'm just being fully disclosure. But maybe yours is Wonder Woman, right? Maybe yours is Spider-Man. My younger son is Spider-Man, but specifically the Tom Holland Spider-Man, mostly because he hasn't seen the other ones. That's not the point. The point is, right, in an era of movies, what have you, everybody kind of connects with that. And by the way, if you're like, I hate superheroes, they're the dumbest thing ever, that's fine too. Tell me what you're into as a kid. Tell me what you grew up with, what characters you liked, what fiction you liked, etc. Because I guarantee you, there's somebody in the room, this room, that shares it. And now you have an uncommon commonality. And it turns out that on work teams, these uncommon commonalities are the beginning of more frequent interactions. They're the beginning of feeling like you could take a little bit more of that leap with the person. Well, I mean, they love Batman and not Superman, who was just an alien who nobody asked for but decided to insert himself in all of our problems and cause more problems. Yeah, you see, it's Batman. Anyway, as you find those things in common, you start to trust that person more. In fact, in a work team, those uncommon commonalities turn into friendships on a team. And as an organizational psychologist, I think this is fascinating because one of the single biggest predictors of someone's engagement, performance, and tenure inside of an organization is can they answer the question, do you have a friend at work, with an affirmative. If they have a friend at work, they're much more likely to be highly engaged. And where do those friendships come from? They come from the uncommon commonalities that are built inside that free time. Now, there's a problem with this, right? Especially in like a post-pandemic era of Zoom, right? Because when I say find free time, people are like, oh, I have too many meetings already. I don't want an unstructured meeting to hang out with my team with. That's not necessarily what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about like, hey, every week with your team, you need to have a Zoom happy hour. Do you remember the Zoom happy hours? Like early on, like March, April, May 2020, we just invited people to our like, sign on Friday at 4. We're going to have a Zoom happy hour. And then we all just sat there staring awkwardly at each other like, I really just want to watch Drive to Survive on Netflix again, you know. Which, by the way, if you're Netflix, there's another uncommon commonality. So there we go, winning some of the non-Batman people over in the room. That's great. All right. We're not talking about the Zoom happy hour, long bits of unstructured time like that. If you can find some of those moments, great. But what I've found is that in a work context, it can be as little as 5 or 10 minutes. Pre-pandemic, when a lot of us were working in person, and post-pandemic, as we're returning to the office and interacting with each other more often, sometimes deliberately running a less structured meeting can be hugely beneficial. I used to be a huge stickler for timing, and now I'm totally okay starting a meeting 5 minutes late because people are catching us up on the rest of their life. And maybe that sounds awful to you, that's fine. Plan in an activity. You can actually plan in something into these meetings, into these interactions that helps people share those uncommon commonalities, right? It can be as simple as asking a crazy, weird icebreaker question, like who's your favorite superhero, or what are you looking forward to this year, or what have you. Or it could be as small as, sorry, I'm going to take you a tangent. My other favorite one, for those of you I lost on the whole superhero childhood thing, try this question instead. If you could be on the cover of any magazine, what would it be and why? right? Like, what are you into? What's your hobby? Is it a fishing magazine? Is it a running magazine, right? What is it? As you can tell from me, it's obviously not Men's Health. So we'll move on there. So as we have these discussions that kind of force people to disclose to the level they're comfortable, we start to find these uncommon commonalities. So we're not talking about large blocks of unstructured time. However, that is the thing I love about conferences like this, there are these micro moments of that time, right? Dinner, the breaks, the different breakout sessions, et cetera, all opportunities to leverage the free time you have to build it with some of the people you work with in the larger work network. Do the same with your team, right? Find that free time. The next one, and this is really what encourages people to go from trust to leap. So we have those uncommon commonalities, and we're hanging out, and we're building that level of trust and familiarity and comfort around people, but we still may not necessarily feel free to take that leap. The next one is what I call, make sure, especially if you're in a leadership role, that you're using your power, your influence to amplify unheard voices. See, the way you encourage people to take that leap and share their brilliance, their crazy idea, to speak up when they disagree, to talk about a failure, et cetera, is you de-risk what they might view as the potential penalties of failing. And we all have people on our team that are probably not sharing as much as we think they should. The quiet people who, when we talk to one-on-one, we know are brilliant, right? And so what can we do to help amplify their voice when they actually do speak up? The reason this works, by the way, is that if you've got somebody on your team who's still working their way in trust to get to the point where they take the leap, the worst thing you can do is call on them directly, right? All of the introverts in the room are like, yes, absolutely, please don't call on me, right? Because not only were they not expecting to share anything, now they feel like there's an even higher risk to actually sharing that out, right? What we want is to de-risk them taking that leap, right? And so amplifying unheard voices does that in a couple different ways. The idea here is that anytime we're in a discussion, whether that's an in-person discussion, whether that's a video discussion, whether that's an email discussion, right? Whether that's even just the thread of comments on a radio, on a Voxer, like on a walkie-talkie function. Anytime humans are communicating, the medium of communication we choose is going to favor some people on the team and disfavor others. An in-person meeting is going to probably favor those extroverts and those especially loud people and those tall people who occupy a lot of space in the meeting room. Yes, I'm all three. You do an in-person meeting with me, right? 6'1" white male, you are going to hear from me because I'm extroverted, I love people, and I love talking. I do it for a living, right? You're going to hear from me. You're going to hear from me a lot. I'm working on it. I am. That's my own personal thing. I'm working on it. You take that same discussion and you move it to email. Do you know what you're going to hear from me? Sounds good. I might not even put punctuation in there. Just an incomplete sentence, sounds good. That's my complete contribution. I have zero desire to type the rest of it out. Right? So any medium of communication you choose is going to favor some people who, because of their own skill sets, because of their own experiences, et cetera, are going to want to share in that, and others that aren't. That's just the medium of communication. You layer onto that how comfortable they feel with the team, their own past lived experiences, whether or not they come from a historically marginalized community, and you've got a lot of people in any conversation who are debating whether or not to take the leap. You don't force them to take the leap. What you do is you look for the moments when they're ready, and you make sure to amplify them. So maybe they speak up a little bit, and you say, hey, that's an absolutely great idea, Sarah. Could we double click on that, spend some time there, and talk a bit more about it? Right? Or you look for the body language that signals that they're ready to talk. And like, hey, Trent, it looks like you've got something to say. If I'm misreading you, no problem, but it looks like you've got something to say, right? What you're doing there is you're using your voice to de-risk them taking the leap because you found that moment. And then you're matching that leap that they took with respect, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, right? So you're using your own power, your own voice, et cetera, to amplify the voices of the people that you're hearing from less often. Please don't call on people, right? But when they are ready to share, make sure you're honoring what they did share. And if you're still having trouble with that, by the way, then maybe we need to switch up the medium of communication that we're doing. Maybe it's not always an all-hands meeting, and we need to move to a different medium of communication. And my absolute favorite trick, if you've got that one person on your team who's like, I never, ever hear from them, my absolute favorite trick is to go, hey, before we talk about this in a group, let's break up, and then I to specifically pair that person with the loudest, most over-talker person in the room. And like, you two discuss, you two discuss, you two discuss. And then we come back, I set this rule. Try this. This is going to work great for you. I set this rule and go, okay, I want to hear what everybody was talking about individually, but here's the deal. I don't want to hear your idea. I want to hear what you loved about the other person's idea. If you follow that to conclusion, what's happening now? Now the over-talker is sharing the underheard person's idea. You basically tricked them into amplifying the unheard voice for you. And in doing so, you help them make that leap and make it much easier. And then the last thing, and this is, I told you that we're not going to do lame things like cross the imaginary river or anything like that. But if you are looking for, hey, how do I build trust fast on a team, build that sense of understanding and all of those commonalities, I'm going to give you a totally free, easy way to build some shared understanding about people's differences and contributions and strengths and weaknesses on your team. And it's what I call the manual of me. It's literally an activity where you and the team write the user's manual to what it's like to work with you. You know, like the user's manual you all got when you got your latest car, the one that's probably still in the cellophane in your glove box because you look everything up on YouTube now when you have a problem, right? It's like that, but this one will actually get read. A manual of me is asking the team to write out, hey, here's what it's like to work with me. And it's not specific details so much as it's strengths and weaknesses and preferences and things like that. When I work with a team, we could take this anywhere we want in terms of how we make it. Some people do it as a memo. Some people do it as a PowerPoint presentation, which sounds awful, by the way, but can actually get pretty cool because people put in pictures of their family and their dogs and what have you. But whatever we use to share it, I build it around 4 fundamental questions that are designed to help build a little bit more disclosure, a little bit more understanding, and a little bit more trust on the team. 4 questions, here they are. Question 1, they're all fill in the blank questions. Question 1, I'm at my best when blank. This is the context, the scenarios, the situations, the type of work that I absolutely excel at. This is what I am great at, which ironically enough is not Excel, at least for me. But there'll be other people on your team for whom it is, right? These are the things I'm at my best at. Maybe this is even the context I'm working in. I'm at my best when I'm in the office or at home or in a third space or what have you. I'm at my best when blank. Number 2 is the inverse of that. I'm at my worst when blank. These are the things I loathe doing. These are the scenarios where I'm really constantly distracted. These are the things I look at and they just kind of drain me. I'm at my worst when blank. So we have strengths and weaknesses in the first 2 questions. The second 2 questions are more about how you fit with the rest of the group. You can count on me to blank. In other words, these are the areas on the teams that I've worked on, I've historically found that I'm able to pitch in and help. These are the things people come to me with knowledge of. These are the things that people ask me, the common questions that are like easy to me but other people struggle with. You can count on me to make this extra contribution to help the team. And then the last question, and the one that I always design last because it's usually the biggest leap, is what I need from you is blank. In other words, this is what I often need from the team in terms of help. In the teams that I've worked on in the past, this is where I often sort of struggle and find myself asking for help. Now, what I love about these 4 questions, what I love about the manual of me is twofold. Number 1, having this conversation on your whole team will inevitably lead to a conversation about whether or not certain people with certain roles and responsibilities should actually be switching tasks with other people, which is awesome. This is like an immediate 10 to 15% bump in your team's performance because we're just having that conversation about, oh, wait a minute, maybe you shouldn't be the right person. Maybe I should be the right person doing that, et cetera. You'll find your team actually opting in to help and support each other, which is awesome. But the other thing that I found is that it creates opportunities for those uncommon commonalities and a deeper level of shared understanding on the team that makes it easier for people to take the leap next time. And by the way, the single biggest thing you can do to make sure that people take this leap of filling out these questions accurately, if you're in a leadership role, you're going first, right? You're not going first too far ahead of time. Like I don't ask you to fill yours out and then everybody copies just what you do, but you're the one who's going to disclose first. When I work with teams, we go person by person through this, and we spend some time after each person shares to have a conversation about, hey, I didn't actually know that about you and what have you. And then actually, ironically, sometimes there are things people didn't actually know about themselves, right? Like, hey, you didn't say that you're at your best when this, but we love that about you, right? Or, hey, you said you're at your best when you're working from home, and that's not true. Okay, you might not want to have that conversation right off the bat, right? But if you're in a leadership role and somebody says that and you're like, yeah, that doesn't actually match up with what I've observed, at least you can flag that. You can note that and you can have that conversation at a later date, right? So there's this great buildup of a sense of shared understanding, but there's also this great buildup in people's willingness to take that leap, to move from trust to that interpersonal leap so that people can benefit, right? And if we do that, we take that jump, right, from building up that level of trust to taking that leap of faith. This is as far as I'm going to step forward. You look like you were ready to catch me, which I appreciate. But as we move from that, we need to make sure that we also learn ourselves how to match people's interpersonal risk, how to match that leap with a sense of respect. And I know these sound like, oh, these are so similar and whatever, and aren't we just talking about trust generically? No, absolutely not, right? Trust is something we feel, and respect is a learned behavior. Respect is not just something it's something you feel when you've taken the leap, but you feel it based on the behavior of the other person and whether or not that person actually knows, right, how to receive that sensitive information, how to deal with that failure, how to model that sense of respect, and I hear you, right? And one of the most frequent incidents of miscommunication and friction I see on a team is when one person thinks they're actually being supportive and they're not. Or one person thinks a type of behavior is actually okay and it's not. One person thinks I'm actually hearing out what they have to say, but the other person does not. There's so much breakdown in this trust loop that happens. There's so much miscommunication that happens under the illusion that the loop closed. So much of miscommunication is the illusion that it happened when it didn't. So respect is that learned behavior. We learn how to kind of model that. In fact, what I think is really, really interesting is when you survey individuals, and leaders in the room, again, I'm speaking to you. When you survey individuals about why disrespect exists on their team or in their organization, the number one reason they cite is a lack of positive examples at the top. In other words, disrespect rolls down through an organization as well. People model the behavior that they see in others. So it's incumbent on us to make sure that we're modeling that positive behavior. And you're like, oh, so what? I'm not even in a leadership role, whatever. That's fine. It's still your responsibility to model that respectful behavior when someone else takes the leap. Let me give you an example of what this looks like in practice. It's actually one of my favorite examples kind of ever of the power of this trust loop, the power of psychological safety on a team. And it happened about a decade ago, and it happened at an organization we've all heard of, but we may not have heard of the leader of this organization. It happened under the leadership of Alan Mulally when he took over Ford in 2006. Alan Mulally was the CEO of Boeing Commercial Airlines on September 11th and also on September 12th, right? Which meant that it was his responsibility to figure out how to bail that airline out, how to keep them solvent in the midst of every major airline in the country canceling their orders. How do we keep this manufacturer in business? Later in 2006, Bill Ford, the great-grandson of Henry Ford, actually called up Alan and asked, could you help us with our company? I know you helped a ton with the turnaround at Boeing. Can you help us with our situation? And here was their situation. In 2006, Ford, a publicly traded company, was trading at $1 a share. $1 a share. Why so low? Well, because the plan that they put out there to investors, their full disclosure of here's how we're going to perform in this fiscal year, the plan called for them losing $17 billion. In other words, if we do everything right, we are still going to lose $17 billion. You think you've got problems on your team, right? This one, if we do things worse, it'll be even worse, right? And one of the primary reasons for that is Alan was looking through the whole organization, studying it before he took on the leadership. One of the primary reasons for that is that Alan quickly assessed that there was a culture inside this organization where people hid their mistakes, where people didn't trust each other. In fact, if you ask the average senior executive at Ford, who's your competition, they would tell you names of other executives in the company and not other automakers. Because they saw every person they worked with as a stepping stone, as somebody I had to move around, a car I had to dodge in the racetrack to get myself ahead. Right? This is a place where nobody discussed their failures because they knew that somebody else would take advantage of it. This was a place where if you showed a kink in your armor, somebody would stab you in it. This was a place where everybody was constantly looking for an edge or a way to edge out somebody else for a promotion. Have you ever worked on a team that felt like that? Did you give that team your best work? Do you think the other people on that team gave their best work? Of course not. How do you get to a point where a multinational organization with a nearly 100-year history is losing $17 billion? You build a culture where no one's willing to talk about what's wrong. And unfortunately for most of us, if you've been working longer than 2 years, you've probably felt a scenario where there is something wrong in the room and no one's willing to talk about it. And that, at its core, was what Alan identified as what was driving this company into bankruptcy. And he knew it needed to change. Now, it's interesting. You can go about this level of change fundamentally two different ways, right? This isn't Alan saying this, but there's another executive I love who says whenever you're trying to change the culture of a company, you have two options. You can change the people or you can change the people, right? And so the board actually asked Alan, which one do you want to do? Do you want a list of the people we think you should probably fire? We'll fire them ahead of time before you come on so you won't get blamed. And he said, no, that won't be necessary. Alan, super nice individual, grew up on a farm in Kansas, was either going to be a preacher or an engineer and got into Kansas State engineering program, and that's what set him on his entire path. Alan was like, that won't be necessary. I'm going to teach these people how to treat each other. And it's not going to work for everybody, and the people that it's not going to work from, they'll self-select out. But at the end of the day, what we need is a team of people who are willing to tell it like it is, who are willing to talk about what's actually going wrong in their responsibilities so we can fix it. And so Alan was committed to doing the exact same thing. I'm going to tell it like it is. And so in October of 2006, they announced Alan as the new CEO, new head of the senior leadership team, et cetera. And in a publicly traded company, anytime you have a big change up like that, you announce it, and then you have a press conference. And the CEO is supposed to come out, they're supposed to come here, come to the podium, and they're supposed to do their big speech about blah, 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 shareholder value, blah, 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 innovation, integrity, we're going to fix things. You're supposed to reassure Wall Street, right? You're supposed to do all of that. And so after he does his whole big thing, they go to a press conference, people ask him different questions, and the first question he gets asked is from a reporter from the Detroit area newspaper, and he doesn't ask him any technical questions. Instead, he asks, hey, Mr. Mullally, curious, what kind of car do you drive? Now, side note here, remember this is Alan Mullally, and he's the new CEO of Ford Motor Company. Okay, so think about your own answer to that question. You've now been asked, what kind of car do you drive? Here's Alan. I drive a Lexus. It's the finest car on the market. That's not even a U.S. car. That's a foreign car. You drive it. It's a luxury car. We don't have really a luxury brand. I mean, we have Lincoln, but that's not really a luxury brand, let's be honest, right? What are you doing, right? Now, very quickly pivots to, and that's why I'm so excited about this opportunity. I know we've had some setbacks, but I feel like we can really compete with Toyota. I wouldn't have taken this job if we didn't, right? But message sent. I'm going to tell it like it is. By the way, every other executive at the company drove a foreign car too. They just didn't tell anyone. They just drove it into the garage, parked it, and then came up the elevator where no one could see them, right? So, but I'm going to tell it like it is. Message sent. I'm going to tell it like it is. And Alan asked his executives, hey, I need you to tell it like it is as well. And the way we're going to do this is every Thursday morning when we have our all-hands meeting as a senior leadership team, I need you to tell me what's going on in your department with truth and honesty. Now, Ford is a major organization. They had 312 different metrics they were using to track how they were performing against the plan. By the way, the new plan that involved not losing $17 billion. Pretty big improvement on their old plan, right? How they're doing against the new plan, right? 312 metrics, 17 different executives on this team, and Alan was going to ask every one of them, how are you doing? Now, that could be overwhelming. Right? We've been in these meetings, a lot of us, we've been in these meetings where everything's sort of super complicated and interacted and like your eyes glaze over and then suddenly it's your turn to share and you're like, yeah, no updates, and then, so it could get a little confusing. So Alan asked every executive, hey, you're each going to have your slides, color code your slides for me so we can get a rough feel of where you are. So what I want you to do is I want you to make your slides green if everything is great. Green means you're at plan, you're performing well, et cetera. Yellow if you're off plan, but you have a plan to get back on plan, which is a lot of saying the word plan, right? And then red if you have a problem and you need to bring it up and address it, you need our help with it, right? So red is a cry for help, right? And yellow is an update on what's going wrong, but we're going to fix it. And green is everything is great, okay? So the first meeting happened, the first Thursday in October 2006, Thunderbird Conference Room, Detroit, Michigan. Attendance for among these executives is mandatory. Well, okay, it's not mandatory because Alan's too nice to say something like mandatory. What Alan would tell you is attendance isn't mandatory, but being the chief marketing officer at Ford Motor Company is also not mandatory. So you can decide if you want to come to the meeting, but if you want your job, you should come to the meeting, right? If you were offsite, et cetera, you came in digitally, and this was at a time where that was way more difficult, right? Where you couldn't just whip out your phone and get on a FaceTime with people. This was the Cisco systems era, et cetera. You had to make it work. 7 a.m. every Thursday morning. Now, think about everything I've said about the company. Think about their losing $17 billion. Think about how this meeting is going to run. Think about what color all those slides are going to be. Here's what actually happened. Every single slide was green. 312 green slides. I asked you earlier, have you ever had a problem where in the room you know there's a problem, everyone knows the problem, and no one's talking about it? Try being in a room with 312 problems, and no one's talking about it. Everyone, hey, we're doing great, we're at plan, et cetera. Alan could not believe it. You're kidding me. We're going to lose $17 billion, and everything's fine? Everything's great. Luckily for Alan, he knew it's just going to take some time for people to get to know each other, to trust each other, to change their interactions with others, right? And it did. It took time. It took 8 weeks of time. 8 separate meetings, 312 green slides. Every week, everything's great. Alan going, you're kidding me. New week, Alan coming in, hey, who's got the gems? He started calling red and yellows like gemstones, right? Who's got a gem where we can find and fix and unlock some value? Still green slides. Why? Nobody wanted to go first because everybody knew that they would also be first out the door, right? Nobody trusted each other enough. They knew how things used to work, and they didn't know, after they took this leap, how Alan was going to respond, so nobody talked until week 9. Wednesday afternoon, before the Thursday morning meeting, one executive was with his team talking about everything that he was responsible for. And that executive, Mark Fields was his name. I assume it still is his name. But Mark Fields was talking with his team, and he realized that they were going to have a delay in the launch of the Ford Edge. You remember the Ford Edge? The Ford Edge, if you bought one in North America, that was produced in Oakville, Ontario. And when it was first being built, the 2006 model, there was a delay. There was a safety problem. The liftgate mechanism wasn't functioning properly. And they could fix it, but they had to fix it manually. So what does that create? That creates a bottleneck. They're coming off the factory floor. They have to be fixed manually. They're building up in the parking lots outside the facility. We can't ship them in time. We're not going to hit our projected launch date. And you get to the point where you can't hide that anymore. We're not going to hit our projected launch date. So Mark tells his team on Wednesday afternoon, hey, I think we should make that slide red. What'd you just say? Yeah, I think we should make that. I think that's what Alan's been talking about. We should probably make that slide red. Mark, you can't do that. We can't be the first red. We're all out of here if we're the first red. We tell them, like, we've been hiding it for 8 weeks already. Like, let's just keep going. Somebody else will go first, right? We can't tell them. Mark's whole team said, hey, you can't do that. Think about what it'll do to us. But Mark decided, no, I think this is what Alan's been talking about. So in week 9, another Thursday morning, another conference room visit. In week 9, everybody's going around. Green, 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 green. Comes to Mark, and Mark says, hey, on the Edge launch, we're red. We got a problem. Here's what's going on. We're not going to meet our projected lift date. We could use some help figuring it out. Yeah, it was that quiet. Everybody's staring at Mark. Turning back to Alan. How's Alan going to react? Looking at Mark, taking a big, long look at Mark. Bye, Mark. I want to make sure. I know what you look like because this is the last time I'm probably ever going to see you. Then they're turning back at Alan. How's Alan going to respond? Alan actually told me he thought that people were looking for him to, like, hit a button under the desk, right? And 2 big dudes in suits and earpieces were going to come escort Mark out, or like a trap door was going to open up. Right? Everybody was expecting that was going to be Alan's response. Instead, here's what he did. Mark, thank you. That's great visibility. All right, team, how can we help him? Let's not continue with this meeting. Cancel the rest of it. We're going to focus in on Mark. You're all lying anyway. He didn't say that, but must have been what he was thinking. Let's focus in on what we can do for Mark. And they talked about what engineers they needed to get shipped up there, communications team talking about how they could work with the dealers, et cetera. How are we going to fix this issue? Now, they didn't fix it overnight. Right? You can't take as complicated an issue of that and, like, suddenly next week he's going to be green again, right? But you could get him back on plan, right? And so that's the end of week 9. Week 10 happens, and all of the executives for the Wednesday before, they're all planning out their slides, and then they come to the meeting, and guess what color all of their slides were? They're still green, right? Because what is everyone thinking? There's no way Mark's in this meeting. We're never going to see him again. That was the end of mine. I'm glad somebody else could go first. Whew, pressure's off, right? That's not what happens. As the rest of the executives file into the conference room, they find that Alan and Mark are already there, following up on last week's issue and talking about what they need to do this week. In fact, Mark is sitting next to Alan. Did Alan just get promoted? What is happening here, right? And Alan would actually tell me, I've had the privilege of working with him, of interviewing him for a long number of time, of hanging out with him. Alan would actually tell me that moment, not the moment where he didn't hit the button and clapped instead. I don't think there was a button, by the way. That moment where everybody walked in and they saw that, wait a minute, Mark's still here. That moment was the moment that saved Ford. Because that moment was the moment everybody saw, wait a minute, if we take this leap and we actually talk about what's going on, that's going to be met not with punishment, not with ridicule, but with respect. If I talk about where I need help, I'm actually going to get help. What a concept, right? But if I talk about it, I'm actually going to get it. That was the moment where everybody went back and they changed their slides for the next meeting. And the next meeting, everything started to actually look like what was happening at Ford. People were sharing their yellows, sharing their reds. They were talking about what's going wrong so they could actually fix it. And little by little, over the 8 years he was a member of the senior leadership team, Alan led them through the trust loop where they would share what's going on, have that leap met with respect and with the help they needed to fix it, and over time, they fixed it. 8 years later, when Alan had decided my work is done, we've turned this company around, I'm going to go talk to the board, I'm going to tell them I'm resigning. 8 years later, Ford's share price was trading at $17 a share. I know what you're thinking. Man, if I could go back in time to 2006, buy some Ford stock and maybe some Bitcoin, I wouldn't even be in this room. Maybe not the Bitcoin part, but definitely the Ford stock. $17 a share, 170% increase. They went from losing $17 billion in the first year to a $6.6 billion profit in his final year. Showed the board his resignation and $6.6 billion in profit. And Alan actually gave them one more thing when he announced his retirement. He said, hey, been thinking a lot about this. This would be my nomination to succeed me as a CEO. And do you know who he picked? Mark Fields. First person to turn his slide red. That's a cool story, isn't it? It's a cool little ending. Nice, tight ending. I love it when movies end on that happy note. But time goes on. And here's the bad news. Mark lasted 18 months as the senior leader at Ford Motor Company before the board asked him to resign. And ever since then, it's been basically a revolving door of who gets to lead Ford. I'd be willing to bet that Ford wishes they could have Alan back. In fact, now that I think about it, I'd be willing to bet that Boeing wishes they could have Alan back too. But Alan's good. Alan's enjoying retirement. What Alan understood that Mark didn't understand and that any senior leader after him didn't understand is that trust isn't given, trust isn't earned, it's not built, it's reciprocated. What Alan understood was there was a constant trust loop, a psychological safety loop going on inside the team that needed to be monitored. Because one time where people take the leap and it's not met with respect, they rescind some of their trust, and everything turns into a vicious cycle instead. And so when Alan left the organization, the culture champion for psychological safety left as well. In fact, that would be my biggest admonition to you, right? No matter what your position is to be that champion who's willing to match people's leaps with that sense of respect. And let me give you a couple ideas on how you can do that in your own way. I hope, sincerely hope, you're not on the verge of losing $17 billion, but I think you're still going to find some of these relevant. Number one is what I call celebrate failure. And what I mean when I say celebrate failure is not like we need to go out and buy a bunch of trophies and hand them out to our lowest performers. That's not what I'm talking about. It's not like, congratulations, you've wasted countless hours, you don't even check your email, you're completely incompetent, you've wasted hundreds of thousands of dollars of city money, of county resources, etc. Here's a trophy. I don't recommend doing that. Unless you have a lot of millennials on your team and it's been a while since they got a trophy. No, that's terrible. Oh, that's I am a millennial too. That's what's funny. I don't mean to like throw the millennials in the room under the bus. I'm actually nothing. I'm that weird borderline. Maybe some of the rest of you are in this room, like where you're between Gen X and millennials. Anybody else? Sometimes they call us the Zennials. Sometimes they call us the one I heard was geriatric millennials, like we're the right. My favorite is I like to be known, Nate Bargatze, the comedian, just calls us the lucky ones because we avoided everything, right? We're just in that middle, and we're unique. We do like the millennials. I like a good trophy now and again, I'll be honest with you. A nice trophy matched with some Pinot Noir or champagne. It's always sort of fun, right? But I also kind of want to be left alone, which is my Gen X side, right? I kind of want both, and that's a little difficult too. I don't mean the trophy thing. Here's what I mean. When someone is sharing, hey, here's what happened, especially when they're sharing it earlier in the conversation, what they're doing is they're taking that leap and they're giving the whole team an opportunity to learn. They're asking for help, and when they're doing it appropriately, if there's no evidence that they tried to cover it up or anything like that, they took the risk. Everyone else in that room is watching, just like Mark Fields and the rest of the executives, is watching what's happening and how you're going to respond and how everyone else is going to respond. So be the one that celebrates the transparency that it took, the courage that it took, the level of trust that it took to actually share it and celebrate the fact that we're all going to learn from it as a result. For the last 20 years or so, I have had this really weird hobby in the spirit of building more uncommon commonalities with you. I've trained, competed, I'm now a little old and sore, and trained other people to compete in this really esoteric martial art called Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, right? Anybody ever heard of this? Any BJJ practitioners in here by chance? There's enough people in the room, maybe. I'm not seeing anybody, mostly because I can't see anything. All right. Jiu-Jitsu is it's a martial art, it's a combat sport, and so we train and then we go compete, and we compete in these matches where the goal is to choke the other person unconscious. There's no nice way to say that. There's no HR-approved way to say it. That's what we do. You're trying to choke them unconscious, to hyperextend a limb to the point where they give up by tapping out on you or on them. Tapping out on them is always better, by the way, because that way they feel it. Sometimes you tap out on yourself, and then you still go unconscious because nobody felt you quitting, right? The goal is to not fail because the consequences of failure are dire. But we have this saying in the community that we use, especially when somebody's nervous about their first competition or a high-level competition, et cetera. We say, hey, don't worry about it so much. The system is designed. The beauty of tapping out is you're basically saying, don't hurt me, like I failed sooner than would be devastating. There's the lesson, right? Anytime somebody actually admits a failure sooner than would be devastating to them or to the team, that's worth celebrating. So we have this saying, you don't actually lose. Because of the tap out, there's only two options in a competition. You win or you learn. You win or you learn. You win, awesome. We'll raise your hand, right? You might get on the podium, we'll put a medal around you, etc. You lose, we're going to take that, we're going to go back to the gym, we're going to talk about what you did, how to do it differently next time, and how to avoid it. You win or you learn. And I think most of us, I would love more people to engage in this really esoteric sport where we wrestle in our pajamas called jiu-jitsu with me. Most of us, you could do that, but most of us still should probably adopt that mentality, that win or learn mentality. And so when learning, in other words, failure, is happening on your team, it's worth celebrating the courage and the transparency it took to admit that. You win or you learn. The second one is I think we all need to get a little bit better on this respect side at treating conflict as collaboration. Treating conflict as collaboration. What does that mean? Well, most people on your team, when they do actually take the leap and disagree, or share a crazy idea that's outside the norm, or it feels like everybody's going to consensus, and they go, hey, hang on, I just had a thought. Most people, when they're doing that, they're not doing that because they think they're brilliant and everybody else at the table is an idiot. They're not. Well, okay, statistically 4% of any population are psychopaths, so the 96% of people are not doing that. What they're actually doing when they speak up because they disagree is they're saying, I see it differently, right? I have a different set of assumptions that brought me to different conclusions, and I care so much about the success of this project, about our operation, about our community, that I can't help but speaking up in this moment. That's not conflict per se. It is. In psychology, we call it task-focused conflict, but task-focused conflict is just another form of collaboration. And we need to make sure that our response is that we don't take it personally when somebody disagrees with us, right? That we recognize, right, that what they're doing is they're sharing with us the benefit of their perspective. And the way you do this, by the way, is you don't push back on their idea. You don't be that leader we were talking about earlier that just meets it immediately with, nah, that'll never work, right? The way you do it, you don't judge the idea at all, actually. You just ask questions. Questions about the idea, questions about the assumptions behind the idea. When two relatively smart people, right, have a different conclusion, most of the time that happens because they made different assumptions about the problem. And so that's what we want to get at. Hey, what do you think, and these could be as little as, what do you think that would cost, right? Instead of saying we don't have the budget for it, what's your thought on how much this would actually cost to initiate? Have you given any thought to that? Sometimes they have, sometimes they haven't, doesn't matter. The point is we're going to go see if that's true, right? How long do you think this would take to pull off? They might have a different assumption than you on it, but that's fine. We're going to go figure out whose is more accurate. You ask questions about the assumptions behind the idea. Sometimes you find out their assumptions are closer to the truth, closer to what actually is going on in the scenario. And so their idea is better. Sometimes you find out your idea is better. Ultimately, it doesn't matter because you found the best idea. And more importantly, even in those moments where they were heard, listened to, considered, and then found wanting, they still feel heard, considered, and listened to, and so they're still more likely to trust you next time. The trust loop keeps moving because you took the time to hear them. This also includes, by the way, calling for conflict as a form of collaboration, like opening the door to a little bit more candor, right? And most of us, by the way, most of us think we do this all the time, right? We read out our long email with why we're so brilliant and our idea is perfect, and then we write thoughts at the bottom. You've gotten those emails, right? Or we're in the meeting, and with 1 minute left in the meeting, we're like, okay, any questions, concerns, clarifications? I love that, right? There's one, we all have another Zoom we're supposed to be on, and I really need to go to the bathroom, but you're going to take that moment at the end and go, questions, concerns. Do you ever actually share your questions, concerns? No, nobody does. It's like when you're at a wedding, right? At the end of a wedding, and the officiant is there, and hey, if anyone has any reason why these two should not be wed, speak now or forever hold your questions, concerns, clarifications. Like, you know you're not supposed to say anything unless you're actually in a soap opera and you've been dead for like 2 years. Just once I want to see somebody be like, yeah, I have a concern in the middle of a wedding. Just see what happens. You ever do that, film it, put it on TikTok. I promise I'll watch it. I might even like it, right? What if we opened the door a little bit more to that? What if we invited that a little bit more? What if instead of saying any questions, concerns, clarifications, we said something like, hey, it sounds like we're all headed to consensus, but I want to make sure I'm not missing anything. What am I missing here? What's not being said here? Anything you do to change your language when you call for those conflicting ideas, to take it off them, like if you have any questions, like if you're not with the program, if you don't understand something, and put it on you, hey, I'm probably missing something here. Can anybody help me? You put it on you, you're going to get a whole lot more of those differing ideas, right? So treat conflict as collaboration. Last up, model active listening. When somebody's disagreeing with you, when they're sharing their crazy idea, when they're talking about a failure, the single most important thing you can do is make sure they believe that you actually hear them. Is to actually listen to them. And then make sure that they actually believe that you are listening to them. Now, when I say active listening here, everybody's like, yeah, I took Comm 101 in high school or in college, what have you. Something about eye contact, right? Of course, how do you make eye contact in like a digital world or on a Zoom or on a phone call, whatever? It turns out when people judge whether or not they're being heard, they actually care much more about not just what you do with your body, but also what you're saying and how you're responding. And so I came up with this acronym that really helps with this sense of active listening. I call it REAL listening instead, because REAL is an acronym and I'm clever, right? Real listening here, meaning when someone else is talking, receive, engage, align, and learn more. Receive, make sure you're actually in it. You're actually listening. You're hearing what they have to say. You're not staring at your phone. You're not checking your endless email inbox. You put away distractions and you're in it, right? Engage. What are the things you do to show that you're actually engaging with them? This could be the eye contact thing, could be body language, could be nonverbals, those little ways you show you appreciate what they're saying. If you haven't figured it out, I talk a lot with my hands. I also listen with my hands. If we're in communication, I'm like, yeah, come on. I often take notes a lot of times just to keep my hands active, and then I'll show you my notes because I want you to see that I'm engaged with you, right? Align. Before you jump into your advice, make sure you're actually aligned. Hey, what I hear you saying is this. But most importantly, learn more. Before you offer your advice, your wisdom, your brilliance, take the time to learn a bit more about the situation. Because you probably already found this is true in your work life and even in your personal life. Most of the time, unless you have a deep, deep level of trust and psychological safety with somebody, most of the time when someone comes to you with a problem, a conflict, a failure, they're not coming to you with the real problem. You ever found that? They're coming to you with a version of the problem that they feel safe to talk about. Maybe they're minimizing the effect of the problem. Maybe they're taking their responsibility out of it. Maybe they're talking about a symptom of the problem. And if you just jump right into advice, right, what's going to happen is you're going to give them advice on the wrong problem. They're going to go in and try and implement it. It's going to fail. And now you're both angry at each other. So before you offer your take, learn more. Ask them the follow-up questions. Hey, tell me more about this. What have you tried, right? What do you think the downstream effects of this? Anything you do to show that you are really listening, and you're going to model that respect that you need to see. And at the core of every interaction we're going to be a part of in our work is this trust loop, moving through trust, leap, and feeling whether or not I was respected. And if you do that, if you keep the trust loop going, you keep that reciprocating, right? And if you do that, you grow in your sense of bonding on the team, you grow in your ability to learn from failure on the team, and you grow in your feeling that, hey, the work that we're doing actually matters, and these people, I actually matter too. And at the end of the day, even beyond this issue of trust and psychological safety, at the end of the day, that's what people want in their interactions at work. They want two fundamental things, and the trust loop gives it to them. People want to do work that matters, work they feel like they're making a contribution to because they can speak honestly to, and they want to work with people who tell them they matter. And at the core of every trust loop interaction is someone trying to answer those two questions. Does my work matter? Does my contribution to this team matter? And do I matter to the team? And if you do both of those things in every interaction you have with people, with your team, with the team you lead, the teams that you're on, you'll keep the trust loop going. Thank you all so much for having me.